Friday. We're taking a look at Ecclesiastes this morning. And the reason I went for Friday was because we're not going to be here on Monday. And so I figured I would try and get you a video a little bit in advance here. So Ecclesiastes, we're carrying on with our series in wisdom literature, looking at some of the material here, its comparisons to other wisdom lit books and other connections in the Old Testament especially. And so we're going to start with a little bit of a different layout. I changed Bible softwares from Accordance to Logos because I'm more familiar with the Logos software, so that's why the layout looks a little different this morning. But it's a little easier, I think, for me to navigate because I have the mobile app as well. So anyway, we're looking at Ecclesiastes this morning, and we're asking questions with the text of Ecclesiastes about God's role in wisdom. And we're going to read through some of Ecclesiastes chapter 1 here in just a minute, and then we're going to go to the end of the book and look at some things as well. So before we do that, what I want to get started on is a couple of quick things. First, the first line of the book says, "The words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem." Typically, that means that this book is attributed to Solomon, although Solomon's not named here. The primary speaker of the text is called the teacher. In Hebrew, that is the word kohelet, okay? And we're looking at that over here on the right-hand side of the screen here. It means the collector of sayings, or the preacher, the teacher, the leader of the assembly. The word kohelet comes from the root word, which means the assembly. So in this case, we're looking at somebody who is leading and teaching and guiding that assembly, presumably with wisdom. Just so happens that this teacher is the son of David and the king in Jerusalem. So it could be anybody following King David and Solomon, but more than likely, given the wisdom and the wise sayings and some of the things we're going to run into here in context and at the end of the text, it seems to be Solomon. So this is kind of how this works. Back in the King's texts, when we get introduced to the reign of Solomon, the Samuel text and the King's text, when we get introduced to the reign of Solomon, Solomon is presented with an opportunity when God comes to him in a dream to ask God for anything. God says, "Ask me for what you want." And Solomon asks God for wisdom because he says, I need wisdom and discernment to lead this great people because I don't know and I'm too young. And give me some help by providing me with wisdom that I need. And God says, "That's awesome of you to ask for wisdom instead of asking for riches and honor. So I'm going to give you the wisdom that you asked for, and I'm going to give you riches and honor." And for the first little while of Solomon's life, that seems to go really, really well. He's wise. His kingdom is expanding. He's gaining territory. He's honored among the nations, and he's gaining wealth and prosperity and all of this for the kingdom. And that kind of culminates with a visit from the Queen of Sheba, who comes and evaluates the king's legitimacy and his wisdom and all of this other stuff. That's sort of the pinnacle here. And that's the good side of what we know of King Solomon. That's the Solomon we know who writes things like Proverbs, who teaches the fear of the Lord and knowledge of the Holy One and has the Lord as his reference frame. And this is good. And we love that Solomon. This is the Solomon who builds the temple, who dedicates it, who prays over it, and has God responds by dropping the glory of God in pillar of cloud and fire, similar to the pillar of cloud and fire that led Israel in the wilderness on the Holy of Holies. And so this is Solomon at his best. However, there's another side to the Solomon story. And Ecclesiastes seems to be more in line with this other side of Solomon's story than it does to be in line with the beginning of Solomon's story. So the Solomon who asks God for wisdom seems to be the Solomon who is responsible for things like Proverbs and Song of Solomon and some of that material. The Solomon we know kind of at the end of his life and the end of his reign seems to be responsible for the text of Ecclesiastes. Somehow responsible. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But anyway, this Solomon is a Solomon we know who married 700 women and had 300 concubines. At the end of his life, we're told that those foreign wives, those other women who did not follow after Yahweh, led Solomon's heart astray. And now we run into a problem. Solomon led astray as Kohelet, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem, If so, this is probably the end of his life after this leading astray. And the reason we say that is what's going to follow. So we're going to dive into some of the text here in the first chapter and do a bit of like, how does this sound compared to the Proverbs material? So the words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the teacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Some of your translations will say vapor. This is breath, vapor, air. It's empty, which is the idea. It's there's no substance to it. So emptiness of emptiness, vapor of vapor. This unsubstantial. It doesn't have any weight or meaning. He says all is meaningless. All is empty. All is just vapor, or chasing after the wind, so to speak. What does a person gain in all his toil with which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth stands forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down. To its place it hurries, and there it rises again. The wind goes to the south, and the wind goes round to the north. Around and around it goes, and on its circuit the wind returns. All the streams flow to the sea, but the sea's never full. To the place where the streams flow, there they continue to flow. All things toil continuously. No one can ever finish describing this. The eye is never satisfied with seeing, and the ear is never filled with hearing. What has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. There is a thing of which it is said, look at this is new. But it has already existed in ages past before us. There is neither remembrance of former generations, nor will there be remembrance of future generations. Okay. We're off to a flying start. Your eye can never be satisfied with what it sees. Your ear can never be satisfied with hearing things. The sea is never satisfied as the rivers run into them. No one will remember you when you're gone. There's nothing new. We all just live out a song hit on repeat. This is the start of the book. This is decidedly opposite the start of the text of Proverbs. The text of Proverbs is hopeful, and it's teaching, and it's inspiring, and it's please follow, lead after, seek after this. This is something a bit different. And when we talk about the emptiness here, there is also no mention of God in the first 11 verses of the text. We're going to get to that here in just a second. Verse 12, he says, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to seek and to search by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. It is a grievous task that God has given to humans to be busy with. God grieves us. This is this perspective with the things we are busy with. I saw all the works that are done under the sun. Look, everything is vanity and chasing the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have become great, and I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has preceded me over Jerusalem. I have acquired a great deal of wisdom and knowledge, so I dedicated myself to learn about wisdom and to learn about delusion and folly. However, I discovered that this is also chasing after the wind. For in much wisdom is much frustration. Whoever increases knowledge increases sorrow. Wow. This guy, Solomon presumably, at the end of his life, is just sort of throwing up his hands. After everything I've learned and everything I know, after everything that has been and with everything that will be, none of it matters. I'm the wisest guy that I've ever known to have existed, and it still doesn't matter. Raises questions here. What kind of wisdom are we talking about in the text of Ecclesiastes? Before I answer that, let's get to kind of the setup and the scope of how the book flows. Chapter 2 kind of starts us on the method of the text. And the method of the text is basically this. Our teacher, Kohelet, our preacher, our king in Jerusalem who is wise and grand, is now going to put wisdom itself on trial. And we are going to see throughout the text of Ecclesiastes that this individual is going to try wisdom applied to varying things in life to see if he can find any kind of substance, meaning, or any kind of satisfaction in this wisdom. And the end of it will be vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. So we're going to see experiments, like we see at the beginning of chapter 2. Come, I will test. Pleasure to see whether it is worthwhile. But look, this is also vanity. And so chapter 2, at least for quite a while of it, is going to talk about the indulgences of the flesh. I said of laughter, its folly, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored the effects of indulging my flesh with wine. My mind guiding me with wisdom, I investigated folly so that I might discover what is good under heaven for humans to do during the days of their lives. The perspective in Proverbs was beyond life to death. The perspective in Proverbs was on the Lord. It was on the eternal things. It was on these things. And it shaped these truisms and these rules for how we live our life. And they may not necessarily be foolproof, but they were aimed at those kinds of eternal things. Job challenged it and said, it may not work out well for me, but that's still the best way to go, to pursue God, to know Him, to seek after knowledge of the Holy One in this kind of experiential manner, this da. Here in Ecclesiastes, our teacher is going to seek after these things. And he starts with pleasure. This kind of hedonistic, if I just make myself feel good. Whether with laughter or with wine or with the good things of life. Can I get some kind of substance of life out of that? And so I want to see if I can discover what is good for humanity in everything that takes place under the sun. I want to see if I can find that out, if I can figure that out, and if I can find substance in all of this. Verse 4, I accomplished great things. I built houses, I planted vineyards, I made pools, I acquired male and female slaves, children born in my house, I had livestock and cattle and flocks, more than anyone who was before me in Jerusalem. Silver and gold, provincial treasures. I acquired for myself male and female singers, as well as the delight of men, voluptuous concubines. This individual is just being self-indulgent. Verse 11, yet when I considered all the effort which I had expended, and the toil with which I had toiled to do, then behold, everything is vanity, and a chasing the wind. There is nothing profitable under the sun. He tried pleasure, it didn't work. It's an experiment. He put pleasure to the test. This was the idea. Come, let's see. Pleasure, gladness. Can I make myself happy? Can I just add stuff and things and people and the pleasures of this life? Will there be meaning in any of that? And the answer at the end is nope, there isn't. All of this gaiety and pleasure, and none of it matters. There's nothing profitable under the sun. That's the conclusion of pleasure. There's nothing profitable in gathering all of that. So what's he going to turn to next? Let's go to wisdom. The skill of knowledge and technical and the shrewdness and the cunning and this God-given stuff. So he's going to test it. The problem here is he tests wisdom. It's not the same kind of wisdom we're talking about in Proverbs. It's all that practical skill that makes you good at managing money, acquiring resources, makes you good at managing people, and etc., etc., etc. But where does he land? He pursues wisdom. Can I just acquire knowledge and discernment and skill and wisdom? Can I just get as much information and practical instruction and wisdom and insight as I possibly can? Will that make any difference? No, here's where he lands. The wise man can see where he is walking. Verse 14. But the fool walks in darkness. Yet I also realize that both of them suffer the same fate. They both die. So I said to myself, I will also suffer the same fate as the fool. What advantage is there in great wisdom? This is also vanity. Certainly no one will remember the wise man or the fool in future generations. I hated life, verse 17, because of the work done under the sun is grievous to me. I do all of this work, I put it all in, and everything is vanity and chasing after the wind. You spend your whole life working and toiling and trying and striving and acquiring. So then what happens? Verse 18, so I hated all of my toil, which I had toiled under the sun, because I have to leave it behind to someone after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or foolish, but he is going to control all of the fruit of my toil. This is a limited perspective. There is no eternal perspective here. Everything he does, he's going to leave behind to someone else, and he's worried somebody else is going to mismanage it, that they are not going to be as wise as he. So he despairs in verse 20. You can toil with wisdom and knowledge and skill, but you're going to leave that reward to someone else who has not toiled for it. So what you have acquired ends up just being meaningless and a tragedy, a calamity. For what do you receive? Nothing. You lose everything. So what's the end of the matter? Verse 23, all his days are painful, and it just brings grief, and your heart can't rest at night. This is also vanity. It's empty. Why is it empty? Because we die. And none of what we acquire, whether it's wisdom or the pleasures of this life, none of it we get to take with us. So where does he land here? There is nothing better for a person than to eat, drink, and find delight in his toil. This is from the hand of God. Wait, that is not how that works. That is not how that works. That is a limited perspective. Who can eat and enjoy life apart from God? Now we're asking the right question. But where does he land here? For to the person who is good in his eyes, he gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and heaping up only to give it to him who is pleasing in the eyes of God. This is also vanity, chasing after the wind. Draws the wrong conclusions because his perspective is limited to this life. It sounds right, but there's something missing in it. It's not quite. God, in the eyes of the writer of Ecclesiastes, is a taskmaster. He's laid on us labor and toil, and so we should eat, drink, and enjoy the labor, enjoy the toil that God has hoisted upon us. Because we're only going to enjoy it with God. He's halfway onto something. But the God he's describing is not the God of Proverbs. And that's not the God of Job. And that's not the God of the bulk of the Old Testament texts, the First Testament texts. To the person who is good in God's eyes, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. Yeah. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and heaping up only to give it to him who is pleasing in the eyes of God. God is basically Robin Hood. Steal from those who don't deserve it to give it to those who do. That's a conception of God without God in the mix from the beginning. And what's the conclusion? This is empty. Because everything I have acquired for myself doesn't matter. I don't get to take any of it with me. It's all empty. We die, and God is just the taskmaster who takes what he's given me and gives it to somebody else, good or bad. If I'm wise and I die and somebody else gets it, God has given to them what I have accumulated for me. And if they mismanage it, God will take it from them and give it to somebody else. Or if they manage it well, when they die, God's going to give it to somebody else. It doesn't matter. It's frustration. And it's meaningless. Everything is empty. And this is the conclusion of chapter 2. Everything is empty because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you started, you die. That's the deal. And this is what he's going to do throughout the text of Ecclesiastes. He's going to take these individual things, labor, toil, work, wisdom, practical this and practical that. And none of it begins with God, but God is going to be blamed or quoted in a lot of it. And it sounds almost like he's right. Because he keeps talking about God. And we trust the biblical texts to be telling us good things about God. And that's right. We should trust all of that. That's great. We need to do that. We need to continue doing that. However, remember the perspective that he's coming from. Right? And so we're looking at chapter 12. And I was originally going to start at the bottom, but I'm going to start here. At the top of chapter 12. To kind of recap this. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. Before the days of trouble come. This is the best advice he gives us in all of the texts. Before any of this happens, right? Here's what he says. When the guards of the house tremble and the men of strength are bent, and when the doors of the street are shut and one rises up and the sound of the bird, and they are afraid of heights, because man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about in the streets before the silver cord is snapped. The golden bowl is broken. And the wheel at the cistern is broken, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to the God who gave it. Before any of that happens, you should remember your Creator. Because you are going to return to dust. And the breath God gave you will return to God. The end of your life is the end of your life. It's all meaningless. You will return to dust, and the breath God gave you will return to God. That is not the concept of Proverbs. It quotes God. It talks about God. It seems to say right things about God, but this is not the God we know in relationship, like we understood from Proverbs, and like we understood at the end of Job. This is God as a cosmic taskmaster, somebody who has set the affairs of men and said, here you go, guys, just go work. This wisdom in the bulk of Ecclesiastes sounds dramatically more like the wisdom of the rest of the ancient world. This is Solomon's heart led astray by the gods of the women in his world. Can't blame the wives necessarily. You got to blame Solomon. This is Solomon, understanding the gods of the world around him. Every god in the ancient world, besides the God of Israel, that was responsible for the creation of humanity, created humanity to work, to toil, to be the slaves of the gods, to be tasked by the gods with things to do. To do that to the best of their ability, and then to be gone. And this is the perspective of Ecclesiastes. When the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the breath returns to God who gave it, that is the end. And it is all meaningless. It doesn't matter what you've done, because you are going to die and go to the grave. And what God gave you will return to God. And what you have acquired for yourself will be passed on to somebody else who may or may not be worth it. When it all comes back to the end of your life, that is it. It's just the end. And so it's meaningless. It's chasing after the wind. It's empty. It's hopeless. And then we get this interesting perspective right here at the end of the book in 9 through 14. And so just hear this out. Verse 9. Now we get somebody speaking about the teacher and the words. Here's what we say. The teacher was full of wisdom, and he taught the people with knowledge. He carefully considered many proverbs and carefully arranged them. Perhaps that's our book of Proverbs. The teacher sought to find delightful words, and he wrote what is upright and truthful words. The words of the wise are like cattle goads. The collection of the sages are like pricks inflicted by one shepherd. My son, be careful about anything beyond these things, for the writing of books is endless, and too much study is wearisome. seems to be a critique of Ecclesiastes. There is such a thing as too much of this practical stuff, too much of this wisdom without the fear of the Lord as its center. So, for the first time in the book, we get to verse 13 here, and for the first time in the book, we get something that sounds like Proverbs. Now that it has all been heard, here is the final conclusion. Not the conclusion of Ecclesiastes. The conclusion of Ecclesiastes is this here in verse 8. The conclusion of Ecclesiastes is everything is meaningless and none of it matters. Just forget it. Who cares? However, this critique here in 13 comes back to the heart of Proverbs. Fear God. Obey his commandments. This is the duty of man. This is what we are made for. Verse 14. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Verses 13 and 14 is the closest thing to the understanding of Proverbs and the problem in Genesis chapter 3 that we are going to get. I would argue that Ecclesiastes illustrates for us the fallout from the problem in Genesis chapter 3. Eve saw that the tree was good for gaining wisdom. And Adam and Eve wanted to know good and bad for themselves apart from God. So now we, quote unquote, know what is good and bad for self. The problem is our judgments are misled. Ecclesiastes is our knowing, good and bad, making that judgment without God's judgment of what is good and bad. Is humanity left to its own devices? Adam and Eve wanted wisdom for themselves apart from God. Fear God before you need to be afraid of God. This is the perspective. This is the perspective. And here, right, as we work our way through the original language, this fear down here, right in here, the knowledge of God is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge, the instruction of wisdom. This is the perspective of Proverbs, and that's what we're getting here in verse 13 of Ecclesiastes, and it's the first time we've seen it in the whole book. It doesn't come from the teacher, Kohelet. It comes from the person who's commenting on the teachings of the teacher. And what I hear in the end of this book is that this is the correction to the perspective of Ecclesiastes. The teacher in Ecclesiastes has missed it. He's missed it. God is the taskmaster, and so eat and drink and find enjoyment in your work because you've just been given a task. God has just levied on you work to be done. And Ecclesiastes is judging what that is, and he's making evaluative statements. It's bad, it's empty, it's meaningless, it's hopeless, it's worthless, it's vapor. It's just chasing down the wind. But verse 14, God brings everything into judgment, whether good or bad. We don't have that prerogative. Because when we decided as a human race to take for ourselves the discernment of good and bad, we cut ourselves off from a right relationship with God, where he provides for us the definitions of good and bad. And our judgments are flawed and faulty, like our judgment to take from the tree in the first place. It seems that what Ecclesiastes is illustrating is this is what wisdom looks like when you do not begin wisdom with the fear of the Lord and the knowledge of the Holy One. When you don't start with that Proverbs start, when you start with just wisdom and trying pleasures and wealth and extravagance and the joys of the flesh, riches and honor and power, the dust returns to the earth and the breath goes back to God. And that is the end, and it is meaningless. You can be full of wisdom and you can teach knowledge and you can consider Proverbs and arrange them, and you can still miss the point. And this is where Proverbs critiques Ecclesiastes. This is where Ecclesiastes illustrates just how important the perspective of Proverbs really, really is. Fear God and obey his commands. This is what Adam and Eve did not do in the garden. This is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments before you have to be afraid of God. It is the whole duty of humanity to fear God and keep his commandments. Because God knows, verse 14, God knows what is good and what is bad, what is good and what is evil. And in order for us to know it in truth, we have to know God's judgment of what is good and what is bad. Otherwise, we will do as the bulk of the book of Ecclesiastes has done. We will label what God has given us incorrectly. It will be meaningless and empty and worthless, and none of it will be what God has intended it to be. And God will become the cosmic taskmaster who has laid heavy burden on us, who is an unfair, unjust king who just says, here, do this work, and when you're dead, it doesn't matter, I'll just give it to somebody else. That's the perspective of God in the text of Ecclesiastes. That's the God that Ecclesiastes is dealing with. That is not the God of Proverbs, who's full of wealth and blessing and wisdom and power that is not of this world, but it's eternal. That's the God Job knows at the end of the book. Now I understand. Now it all makes sense. And so you can pursue wisdom like Ecclesiastes, but you will end up empty. You can pursue wisdom like Proverbs, but be careful. Don't make the rules into promises. And you can pursue wisdom like Job, and you can understand that knowing God matters more than any of it. And that's probably the best critique of everything in Ecclesiastes. Job's realization that knowing God makes the rest of our lives make sense speaks directly to what's missing in Ecclesiastes, except for verses 13 and 14 of chapter 12. Because what's missing in Ecclesiastes is this relatedness to God where we know him and we honor him. Ecclesiastes sounds hopeless because it doesn't have God as its center. Next time, we'll look at the Song of Solomon, where instead of us finding wisdom, instead of us going after it, it's wisdom coming after us. Have a good weekend, guys. I hope your 3 days are restful.